This program is brought to you by Emory University.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, and thank you for all of you who have made time to come today. I know there are people who have been here for the 3 lectures. Thank you, David. Thank you, Prof. 2 professors, and thank you, Justin, for making this happen. Now, I would want to start by saying that I have 3 things I want to bring forth. One, I know that this is the 3rd and the last of this series. We have had discussions with the organizers. There is hope that we are going to have this in the next semester as well. It may come in different names, but it's still going to be religion and human rights in Africa. So we look forward to that. And but then the second thing that I want to start with is I want to start by telling us that while I have no illusions of our Kanda being in Africa, I think there is reason for us to revisit the realities of our situation. I think it is important that we ask a few questions about religion, ask a few things about common law, and ask a few questions about culture. Can religion, culture, and law be in tandem? And I will start by just giving us a bit of a quote from Dr. Tayo. And this is what he says, that if Christianity is to become effective and meaningful, it must be an indigenous religion of Africa. It must embrace the African soil and culture. It must be capable of dealing with the issues and problems of Africa. In that effort at indigenizing Christianity, the Christianity must produce a Christianity that addresses itself to the issues of, 1, human liberation, and it must deal with poverty, it must deal with humiliation, it must deal with exploitation, and finally, that Christianity must also deal with cultural imperialism. In this lecture, I hope to have the following. I have the following thoughts that I want to share. First, that while the missionaries came and told us that we needed to change our way to reflect the modern society, the modern world was not in tandem with African culture, it failed to tell us what we were to replace it with. Tom Boyer, in his book Freedom and After, says, no effort was made to trace what was good or point out to the potential leaders of the community what needed to be modified in the African culture to reflect the reality of the modern world. The other thing that we need to look at is when the missionaries came, they they taught Christianity as understood in the Western culture. They demanded that form of Christianity, and in fact, when you're talking about marriage, the marriage that they promoted was a cultural Western marriage. Therefore, then, in this lecture, I'm making a few suggestions. And the first one is that common law and Christianity must reflect cultural realities of Africa and the African Christian. And then the second thing is that it must accept Christianity, Western Christianity must also accept that blanket rejection of African culture was not a Christian endeavor. The truth is, it was one of those Western imperialism gabbed in the authority of the scriptures. And the Africans had, at that moment, had no way of knowing what was Christian and what was not. Let me finish that by giving you this story. That when I was 10 years old, I was lucky to leave the 10-mile radius of my village. My dad used to work in Nakuru, and I lived western part of Kenya, so we got a chance to call us to go over the Easter holidays to go and visit him in Kenya, in Nairobi, in Nakuru. And that was the first time I came across electricity. We lived in and walked by the stars in the night, and the moon by night, and the sun by day, and therefore, electricity was was a wonderful thing that I experienced for the first time when I was 10 years old. One of the days, my older sister took us around, so we went to the Nakuru National Park. And at the national park, there is a place for the public to walk around as you see the animals. Then between us and the animals were electric fences. And my sister told me this as we were starting out on our tour, that do not touch the wires, for they are dangerous. She didn't explain what danger meant. And I looked around, I couldn't understand how these harmless wires could be dangerous. So I did the unthinkable. I went and grabbed one of the wires, and I was thrown off, and the next thing I had myself saying was, Nakia. Nakia is a Luo for I didn't know. When the missionaries came, they told the African that it was unchristian to certain practices, marriage practices that we had were unchristian. Part of that also included a prohibition against polygamy. While the African has now been able to read and understand what Christianity, the electricity that was dangerous, that prohibited polygamy, and now he has found that in Christian, clearly there's nothing in the Bible that clearly and outrightly outlaws polygamy. Therefore, it's up to the Christian to understand, it's up to the African Christian to either embrace monogamy or polygamy, but that should be out of choice, but not out of the fear of offending the religion of the book. Temporal laws, finally, must also change to reflect and, in fact, hopefully, legitimize polygamy. I will take us back then to a few things. Now, the Western notion of marriage in the 20th century, 19th, then 18th and 19th century, as Western Christianity made it to the shores of Africa, they had an understanding of what marriage was, and this was the Western understanding of what marriage is. If you look at, well, sorry, I think I went a little far. Yes, Western marriage notions of what marriage is. For how many years? For that, why does it? It's skipping. That's fine now. Oh yes. Now, 13th century to the 16th century, we have a Renaissance in Europe, and we now find the evolution of this a Renaissance man or woman who is a humanist. He is a free-thinking individual. He is very indulgent. He is very artistic and a master of the classics. You find, of course, that is about the same time that we have William Shakespeare and his tragedies. For example, we have Romeo and Juliet, the tragedy of impeding love by individual choice of love to family loyalties. You can see that in many of the literature of the Western nations, the Western societies. Therefore, then, for them, marriage needed to be a decision of individuals, and it needed not to be troubled by family loyalties as well. We have individual Enlightenment ideas in the individual liberty, equality, fraternity, religious tolerance, popular sovereignty, constitutionalism, and natural rights. There is an individual. Then finally you find that in the churches, they also have canonized marriage. Marriage is a sacrament. It is a sacrament. And it's a sacrament that is strictly monogamous. It can only be between a man and a what? And a woman. And it can only be, many times then, it was one, you decide to marry, it's a marriage forever, you know. Divorce was not really much appreciated or accepted then. And then finally, the law followed. You know, the law always follows. It's very late in making changes. The law follows suit by the Matrimonial Causes Act of 1857 of the UK. Marriage now becomes not a sacrament, but as a contract between a man and a woman. And divorce could now be decided by civil and not ecclesiastical courts. And then when you find in 1882, there's a Married Women's Property Act. Now, there's a woman is now an individual, is an entity. Marriage does not subsume her identity as a person. And then finally, as I will illustrate to you through later, polygamy is treated as a capital offense. Professor John Whitty gives a very good illustration, as I will later tell you. But look at the common African notion of what marriage was. For Africans, everyone must get married. Then, everyone had to get married, and it was a point of convergence. The departed meeting the living, and then the living and the departed united with the unborn. So it's not just a drama where you can sit and watch. Everyone is a player, and therefore it's a duty, a requirement from the corporate society, and a rhythm in life in which everyone must participate. That is John S. Mbiti in Love and Marriage in Africa. And it's not just an affair of two individuals. It brings together families, it brings together relatives, it brings together individuals, not just individuals, but societies and communities in partnership. And the communities must have, therefore, a say. The communities must therefore have a say in who, the communities have a say in who, welcome. The community must have a say in who becomes your wife or your husband. And then, because it was also the surest way of propagating society, and this was a time when plagues and Africa was sparsely populated, and there was danger everywhere. Therefore, then they supported, at least the society lauded polygamy, because it ensured that there is this thing we call the fire of life. We ensured immortality through your children. You are immortalized through your children or your children's children. You are named, someone names you, and by being named, we believe, or at least the Africans believed, that your spirit lived on in your children. So then polygamy was encouraged. And individual, I am because we are. That was the African philosophy. I am because we are. And therefore then when it came to a point where you are forcing the African to forget these philosophies that made life what it was. And then there was an age system where there are rites of passage. Everyone is expected, when you are born, we celebrate your birth. At certain ages, to mark a transition between adulthood and adolescence and adulthood, there are certain rites of passage that were important. And this is what it is that made sense then. So then, if these two civilizations met, and then indeed they did meet, there was bound to be what? There was bound to be a bit of a clash. And this is what I will focus on. Now, the point of conflicts were three, mostly three, but I will highlight four. The first one was the missionaries believed in establishing the romantic love and individuals making a free choice. I come to the US, I meet someone from the North Pole, and we talk like each other, and well, I confess love, I propose marriage, and she or he, she says, I am a man. So then he says, you let it be. So we go to a church, and that was it. And that is what they expected of the Africans. But that was not the reality that we faced. And then many missionaries also never understood the practice of gift giving as regards marriage. And therefore, then they had a number of they had things they called it bride price, they call it dowry, they call it wife buying or selling, equating it to slavery and oppression of the women. The third thing that was they couldn't understand is that they understood marriage as monogamous, and therefore then they were out to fight and establish monogamy over and against polygamy. And finally, you can see from John Whitty's Western case for monogamy over polygamy that for 2,500 years, the practice of monogamy was so established in Western societies that it was polygamy was treated as malum in say offense. That means it was just offense in itself. And it was not just an offense, it was an offense comparable to slavery, it was an offense comparable to sex trafficking, to prostitution, to indentured servitude, to obscenity, to bestiality, incest. Look at that. This is how they understood polygamy. Therefore, then there had to be a clash. There had to be a clash. Africans with their appreciation of what it is to be married, Africans with their appreciation of what it means to belong. Africa with their appreciation of everyone had a place. And therefore then, it mattered not that we had so many men go fight in many battles, and they would die in battles, or they would be sold off to slavery, or, So then they found ways of ensuring that there was a balance, and the balance was through ensuring that everyone had a place, and that place was within marriage, within a family. The second point of conflict was female circumcision. This was required as a rite of passage. It marked a transition, at least for the communities that practice it, it marked a transition from being just a child to being a woman, and a woman of marriageable. You are now, once you went through this, you are now ready for marriage. And men would come, suitors would come to your family asking your hand in marriage. But then this was not acceptable. Now it's commonly called female genital mutilation. And I'm not saying anything. Well, I will just, and this is what happens. One such person who was very much against female circumcision was one Dr. John Arthur William. You met him in the first lecture. He was a medical missionary, Scottish Presbyterian Church that was based in Kikuyu. Kikuyu was not too far from Nairobi, and therefore then what happened there reflected and of course he represented the interest of the Africans in the legislative council. So that when he spoke against female circumcision or female genital mutilation, communities thought about it, and they looked at it as a unity of the church and the state in fighting against the culture of the African. They thought that female genital mutilation was primitive, it was barbaric, and against their standards. And because of that, in 1929, this had to be led by the Kenya African Union, that was a political organization in Kenya. They rebelled, the Africans rebelled. And as a result of that rebellion, we find that African independent churches started coming up. For example, we had the Thai fraternity of Kenya, the Aradhi, also known as Watu wa Mungu. And we also have the Akorino, then we have the African Independent Pentecostal Church, and African Orthodox Church. These churches still exist because they had us a message, and the message was, we have gone now, we understand Christianity, you taught it to us, but our appreciation and understanding of the issues is not as you teach us. Let us go out and Africanize Christianity. The third point of conflict was, of course, what they considered as forced marriage. Forced marriage. What was forced marriage? Well, at least I asked an older man from my community, and for example, Archdeacon Owen writes a scathing report about the status of women and girls in the Kavirondo in 1929, and he states as one of these reports that they are still subjected to slavery and forced marriage, and this is what used to happen. We had people we called Jogemo. Jogemo or Jagam was an important man. You have an auntie who is married in another village, and you most times, many of our communities don't. Many of the Luos, for example, don't. You just don't wake up. You don't get to the next homestead and say, I want to marry from there. There are always these kinship ties that are very long, and therefore then a whole district, you can find that people live there and no one can marry each other. So then it's very hard, and there was no means of transport then, and there were no schools to go to and meet people from different places. So the best way to deal with this was a Jagam. A Jagam was a person, your auntie who is married somewhere else, who has identified a good boy from the other side. They come and discuss this with your people. And I think sometimes they even organize an informal meeting where dance companies move from your village to the other village, and at least so that you see and know each other. And then one of these things, a mock show of Vela would be that once they were agreed, that then young men, you together with the young men from your village would come and then wait for these girls as they go to the river, and then of course she knows and she expects it any of the day. She doesn't know when, but she expects it. And then you come and in a mock, whatever, take her home. There are also instances when two people have expressed interest in a girl. The girl is spoiled for choice. She says, well, whoever, so then these two people duel, and whoever gets to. In other words, these practices that were part of the culture, they made sense to the Africans then, but the missionaries could not understand. They couldn't understand it, and some of those, that's what many times they call forced marriage. There are places, of course, where, for example, you go to the ladies. You go to the ladies' parents and tell them that you send people. You just don't go. You send people to the ladies' parents and tell them that I am interested in this girl, and we are interested in your girl, but they say no. And when they say no, these are people, welcome. These are people who love each other thoroughly. So what do you do? What do you do? What do you do? Thank you. They love each other thoroughly. So what do you do? They organize and they elope as well, and I think that was something that was common across the cultures. The final thing that I want to, of course, yes, arranged marriages, of course, and of course, this cannot they can't understand it because for 2,500 years, the marriage is a union freely entered into between a woman who has a fitness and a capacity to and freedom to marry, and that fitness and capacity, in that you are incapacitated if you've already contracted a marriage that has not yet been dissolved. So some of these things were bound to bring conflict. Some of these things, there was no other ways but to deal with them as they came. Now, the final thing that I want to highlight is, of course, the gift giving during marriage. Gift giving is universal, I think. It had been universal. Changes have been, but for example, many times when you talk about bride price amongst in the Western societies, it was just a giving of a token of appreciation. Well, at least amongst the Africans, that was it. A token of appreciation. And you were demonstrating to these people that this is how much we value your daughter. In fact, many ladies would, even up to now, brag about how many cows were brought as part of the gift, as a gift to their parents when they got married, or how much was brought as a year. A year is something little, something that comes before the actual big gift, and this goes to the mother of the lady. When Daniel Nsereko, the Justice Daniel Nsereko, wrote in 1975 on marriage gifts and nature and functions of marriage gifts and in customary African marriages, he didn't have an equivalent in English language, an expression of what it actually means and what it stands for. So then he ends up calling it marriage gifts. And there's so many other, and it gives a very elaborate ways through which different societies went about it and what it meant. It never was slavery as the missionaries understood it. It never was meant to sell a woman, because a person is not, there's no value that you can attach to a person. And it was never what they understood it to be. Finally, and our laws were very silent on this for a long time. Well, our laws were not so silent. Even the formal laws require that if you are claiming to be customarily married, gift giving had to be part of the. You have to show that you gave out gift to the parents. That has changed with the coming into effect of the 2014 Marriage Act. Now, of course, the British were now a people of the law. They believed in supporting their law with facts. They believed in supporting their law with whatever they believed with the law. And that's why in 1902 they come up with the Marriage Ordinance Act, and the Marriage Ordinance Act only recognizes the marriage between two Europeans. We could not understand, at least that's what their impression was. We couldn't appreciate the greatness of the British law, and therefore then, and it's only 27 years later that, in fact 29 years later, that they come up with African Christian Marriage and Divorce Act, and it only applies to who? Africans who are what? Who are Christians. In 1931, the percentage of Africans who are Christians is not so much. So then it only affects. It's only applicable to a few people, probably 10% or less of the African population. And then, of course, we have the Matrimonial Causes Act of 1941, but this still deals with the European and the Kenyan European, but then the one thing that it does is little by little it opens up to what was called in Britain then as common law marriage. Common law marriage is when people just live together as a husband and wife, but they don't go on to to solemnize their marriage. And then the other thing that alongside it, and this only affected the Muslims, there was this Mohammedan Marriage and Divorce Succession Act of 1906. And the Mohammedan Marriage and Divorce Act recognized polygamy, and it was governed by the Qadi courts. Qadi courts were the Islamic religious courts, and they still exist now in Kenya, and they are constitutional courts protected by the constitution of our country. Finally, the Africans want to reflect who they are. They decide to start discussing 50 years after independence that we must have a law that reflects who we are, a law that will respect our culture, and a law that will reflect the reality that we have. And the reality that we have is that customary marriages are common, in fact more common than anything else. In Africa, I think 70% of marriages are customary, and therefore then they are potentially polygamous. And therefore then they come up with a provision under the Marriage and Divorce Act that says you must register your marriage, and when you register, whether it's customary or not, and when you're registering, you have to say whether it is potentially polygamous or not. But there are others. For example, there are five marriage regimes. We have this civil marriage that is, you go to the authorities, you register it. That has to be monogamous. We have the African Christian marriage, or Christian marriage. It has to be, you have to register it, and it has to be celebrated by a recognized or registered, certified clergy. It has to be monogamous. Then we have the Hindu marriage, which must be by the Hindu laws, and it has to be monogamous. Then we have, of course, the Islamic law, Islamic marriages, and Islamic marriages are under what? They are potentially polygamous, and you have to register it as well. And then finally, we have the customary marriage, and customary marriage is also potentially polygamous. There is the requirement that you say, well, it's presumed that it's potentially polygamous, but it helps if you specify in the form that you have to fill as you register the marriage whether it's potentially polygamous or not. Now, I want to reconcile religion and culture through just giving us a video of how worship, how praise to God happens in an African Christian, in an independent Christian church, and so then I have these videos I want us to watch. But it was not enough that the religion of the book was translated into the African languages. That was not enough, because the religion of the African was not just about a book. It was about rituals. It was about customs. It was about rites. And therefore, then, when you now bring to us a book, the religion of the book, and telling us that this is how you need to worship, that experience is not what it was. Okay, because an African traditional religions, and when they worship you get into the spirit and you do a lot of things. I will explain that as we watch the video. And then missionary Christianity refused to accept these things, but African independent churches, in most instances, tried to went beyond the translation of the religion of the book into the African culture or in the African language, and that's why I think I'll try. I don't know what time we have. We have. I think I want to do. Do I do this the shorter version? Now, I think I just want to explain. I want to explain what the reason Christ. That is the. It's a musical that is very popular during the Easter cantatas, when they make all that beautiful music and all. But when you translate the risen Christ into Yesu Oyaorangash, which is the title that they give to their song, that simply means that Jesus has opened the gate. And when you say Jesus has opened the gate, it's not just it has a serious cultural cultural significance. For example, it communicates that Christianity is in conformity with the Luo custom on birthright and on the establishment of a new home. To Yaorangach, simply the Luos believe in respecting the order of birth. And therefore then an older person cannot come into a younger person's home unless that older person has their own rangach. If you go ahead of them, if a younger person goes ahead of an older person, they cannot even go into they can't go into the new person's home before they have their own. And that reflects Jesus being the firstborn of the risen. We believe in resurrection. You're saying that Jesus is the firstborn of the resurrected. He has resurrected, and therefore we also have a right to or a promise to resurrection as well. And then you can see that they are lamenting the death of Jesus Christ, but that he is risen as well. But then amongst our people, death and life are celebrated in a big way. When a child is born, there's a big celebration. When a person especially if is a person of an old age, dies, that also comes with a big celebration as well, because you just don't wake up one day and. Many times people have looked at us and wondered whether we really truly mourn, or we just go there to eat and dance so then when you can see in that song that there are every aspects of different songs. For example, dengo, that is always known amongst dengo, is normally done by the ladies. You can see a few nuances from the dengo and siguia as well. Men were expected to mourn their equal in a different way. You had to do certain chanting, and that you can see in that performance as well. And then of course you can see a few different Luo dances here and do here or alo young, or where you I don't know who knows and they can explain the different dances of the Luos. But you can see that in that performance as well. It is Christianity, yes. And tell me what was offensive about that performance. It has accepted and reflects a little of what our cultures were. But tell me what is anti-Christian or anti-Christ in that performance as well. There's nothing. And then finally you can see, of course, a bit of chant. You know, we believe that certain things when you did during a religious exercise. For example, when you did certain things, it would invoke the spirits to come and partake in your. And you could see people you know, you could hear a few of that as well. And then finally you can see that there are different Luo instruments. We have an Auporo, which is the horn, Aurutu, which is just the Aurutu, that instrument that made, and then there is Nyidwonge, Asili, and Bul, which is a drum. And finally, I think as an African I would identify with that performance I would easily identify with that than some of those wonderful opera performances that let me finalize by saying taking this quote, and I have to thank the Rose Library for being the laboratory that I used even as I'm researching on this paper. The world is changing, he had told him, and I do not like it, but I'm like the bird, Enek anti Oba. You get it right? Say it as it should. Faiza wants to help. Oh, I tried, yes. When his friends asked him why he was always on his wing, he replied, Men of today have learned to shoot without missing, and so I have learned to fly without perching. That is Ezeulu, the high priest of Ulu, explaining his decision to send his son Oduche to the white man's religion and school. This is what, and that's the arrow, Chinua Achebe's arrow of God at page 50. This is what the African had to deal with. This is the high priest of a pagan god deciding that Christianity is a reality that we have to contend with, and the only way I can deal with it is if I know what happens there. So he tells his son, go out there and learn, be my ear and my what? And my eye in that place, because the world is changing and I don't like it, but we have to contend with this reality, and that's why we must find a way of interacting with Christianity. If a high priest of a pagan god, an African was willing and ready to engage with Christianity, why was it so hard for the missionary to be willing and ready to engage with the African and his culture? Thank you, and I open that for questions. Now it's the time for questions and probably additions, because I see people from my village here, so they understand a few of the issues that I've raised. Welcome, Linda, as well. Thank you. Any questions? And yes, Justin.
Thank you, first of all, for that really insightful presentation.
Thank you.
My question is, I guess my first observation is that I hear you arguing that the early Western missionaries misunderstood African polygamy.
Yes.
And that prohibiting polygamy was a mistake.
Yes.
I guess my question about that is do you think that it makes sense to think of polygamy as a right? And if so, is it the right of Kenyans? Is it the right of humans? Is it a right of men, of women?
Yes.
How
Could I
would you
use
understand it as a
Okay.
legal concept?
Okay. Is polygamy a right, and is it a right of Kenyans? This is my personal opinion. First, I believe that the law should have very little to do with what happens in marriage. Of course, communitarians would come out and say, we need to have, communities should reflect certain ethos. In an ideal world, the law should have very little to do with what happens between persons. But where the law, and of course you understand, and we understand that law is the weakest of social instruments of social control. It's the very weakest, and therefore then whatever it does is to lay the very basic of the very basic of requirements. So yes, should polygamy be a right? What I'm saying is, if the maybe this is different in the Western societies where they invoke Western traditions as the basis for polygamy. But when polygamy in the African setting was the basis for polygamy in the African setting it was sold to us as the anti-Christian. Let that point be out there, and therefore then let us re-evaluate the prohibition that we have put against polygamy. At least in my native Kenya, we have gone past that, and therefore the law now recognizes by edict, by legislation, that there is a right to, not really as a right, but one could choose. There's the choice of polygamy. As an individual, I am a polygamist. As an individual, I am a monogamist. At least.
As your legal counsel, I think you better be clear.
But then let me give you this example. I was home in December, and I think I said it here before. Maybe I didn't. But at the end of a 2-week evangelistic campaign, an old man of 70, I think 75 years, decided to become a Christian. And one of those things they had to do was to call his wives, he had 3 wives, and sit them down and tell them, the old man has decided for baptism. What do you say? The 2 older people came out. They didn't want to stand between the old man and his Christianity. And they said, that old man, we are done with him. And therefore then, officially, we are declaring that he is the younger. He'll now only belong to the what? To the younger wife. Therefore, go on and baptize him. Should Christianity do that? And you're doing that, and that's a very the example is not too bad. And an example that I read about is that some Christian some chief wanted to become a Christian, and the missionaries told him, you cannot become a Christian because you're what? You are a polygamist, and he had 2 wives. The chief went away and then came back. I don't know how true this is, but I read it and I can give you the quote. When he came back, after a few months, he came back and he told him, now I want to be a Christian. And the missionary told him, you can't be a Christian. Why can't I be a Christian? I can't be a Christian because you can't be a Christian because you are polygamous. He says, I'm not a polygamist anymore. What happened to your second wife? He said, I killed her. Then, you can't be a Christian. Why? You're a murderer. You see how these things, they're not, we can debate them in these halls, but they're things that affect people every day. And of course, some of the things that I say are considered controversial even in my church as well. So I know that as well. So I think I can talk a lot more, but let's open it up for someone else. Another question. Oh, yes. Thank you.
A question I have for you, it seems to me that you're portraying the pre-colonial Africa as this very pristine place where marriage was equal and women had rights and men had rights.
Yeah.
And I think I want to push back on that.
Okay.
Because, I think there's usually a tendency in trying to counter how colonialists restructured African societies in going to the extent of saying that things were much better than they were before. And I'm not saying that after the colonialists things would be much better. So with that, even with the Marriage Act of 2014, the fact that women can't marry other men, we can't marry many men basically. So even within that customary marriage, so there's still some sense in which the rights of men really are being protected throughout, and not necessarily for women. So I'd like for you to respond to that.
Okay.
And also add to that, because now you can marry in Kenya.
Yeah.
You can marry another wife and not inform your current wife. That's a law that we just passed too.
Okay.
So yes, the rights of men are being protected.
Okay. Now,
What does Christianity have to say to that? African Christianity.
well,
Fine by you.
I just, if you give me one, I will not say that polygamy is ideal. In fact, there are 2 reasons. Normally there are mainly 2 big reasons why, most common reasons why there are most marriages most polygamous marriages in Kenya. The first one is what they called interventive polygamy. And interventive polygamy is where we are married, but we have come to a problem. Our problem could be childlessness. If a man could not give a child, it was easy. You know how easy it was. A few of you agree, and it's a very silent thing where a woman can agree to someone, and yes, not sister wife. If a man can't give birth and he has a problem, his brother can help him, or someone that the woman chooses sometimes could what? Could help. But what they were trying to do is to ensure that they stayed within a bloodline. So that, but then he would raise them as his own, and no one would know about it. But what happens when it is a woman who can't? Many times, the ladies would sit down and they would talk and they agree to this. I don't imagine, there are so many bad things that happen in polygamy, even as there are so many bad things that happen in monogamy. So the details of what happens within, I have not gone into, and I would not say that I know. Well, I do know because I've seen a few of those challenges. So yes, you are right. Polygamy is not the best thing. What I'm only saying is, let the law and let not Christianity wrongfully lock out that option. About you, a Christian, a man marrying without informing the wife. It wasn't traditionally the case, and that's why we should fight back. We should fight back. So
Is there an opportunity for Christianity, do you think?
it could be, yes, go ahead.
Present itself as, sort of a champion for equality within marriage by stepping into this kind of space potentially.
Very well. That's one of those reasons why Christianity should speak out, especially in Kenya, and make it clear about these issues, of course.
So would you say the new marriage acts, because you kind of spoke about how you had all those
Safeguards,
yeah,
yes.
and then there's the new one that represents the African Christianity and African people in general. Would you say the marriage act is sufficient with the way it is present, considering what the issues they've raised, or you think it still needs to go better to show what African Christianity is about?
No, even in the marriage act, if you are married under the African Christian marriage, if you are a Christian and married in church, you are also not allowed polygamy as well. So it's not, they are not yet there. So it is just African customary marriage as well. So that's what I would say now. I know we have it's 12, but you have something. Anyone else who has? Prof has something. So yes, first. Yeah.
Between the Christian marriage and the civil marriage with the new act?
Is there a Christian marriage?
No, I know you said there's a civil
Yes,
marriage,
yes.
there's a Christian marriage.
Yes.
Is there any difference between the two?
Civil marriage, you don't have to go through the ceremonial requirements of church.
Okay.
But the Christian marriage, you have to do banns, and you have to go to church, and you have to eat cake, and all that as well. So, yeah. Professor Witi.
So thank you. This is very, very interesting material, and all three of these presentations have been excellent. I commend you warmly for opening this world up to us.
Thank you.
I think what some of the questions that we've just heard have been trying to harmonize your last presentation,
Yes.
strongly supporting the notion of rights
Okay.
in Africa,
Yes.
indigenized understandings of
Okay.
rights in Africa,
Okay.
and particularly protecting minorities that don't otherwise have representation, a strong theme of your last
Yes.
presentation.
Yes.
And then the reality that there are the disenfranchised or the unprivileged in a marriage context or in the family context.
Yeah.
That you brought up in the first part of your lecture today.
Yes.
And so if rights talk is a useful talk, why isn't rights talk important to think about in the context of the woman's right or the child's right in a polygamous context?
Yes.
And if not there, why would a woman's rights concern animate your reservations about female genital mutilation? How do you figure out episodically where you're going to locate a rights discourse as being proper, and when you're going to simply say it should be a matter of private
Okay.
family decision?
Okay.
The second part of the question second part I want to ask is, how do you harmonize the last part of your lecture, which was this wonderful, aesthetically beautiful presentation of a syncretized liturgical tradition of Christianity and African customs, with your thesis about syncretizing African and Christian or Western missionary versions of marriage and family life? Is your argument that syncretism that we see beautifully ensconced in that video the same syncretism that you want to impute to the marriage and family sphere? And if you are doing that, isn't that a big jump? Big jump to simply say because it works liturgically, therefore it should also work institutionally in a family context.
Okay. Now, sorry, the rights talk. It is true that there's always this question of does polygamy uphold women's rights? And for a long time it was the general comment by the Human Rights Council says that polygamy cannot uphold the right, the equality between or the equality between the sexes, and that may be true. For example, when you are talking about the discussions leading to the African, sorry, let me drink some water. Okay. The discussion leading up to the 2014 Marriage Act, the people who were at the forefront pushing for recognition of polygamy were FIDA Kenya, the Women League, or the Women Lawyers Federation in Kenya. And the reason why they were looking at it, they were asking that it be recognized is because of the challenges people have had with succession. We have these informal arrangements where you live with someone, everyone knows you as their wife, or at least you introduce them as your wife, and then you die intestate. And then here you are being inherited. First, you cannot have a place. Your children can go and claim, but you as an individual has no place in the inheritance battle that follows. So yes, and when you're talking about polygamy, I know there's always the reality that we have today is polygyny. That's the reality. But can't we not? Well, you can't be. There are places that, at least in Africa, we're talking about polygyny. But there are places in the world where you have polyandry as well. Okay? So then, it can be a rights issue, and many times, given the many different experiences that people have had with the debate, it's never men trying to be dominant. It is the reality, dealing with the realities of our world today, and at least in different societies. Now, I am what I'm asking in my thesis is that we come to an agreement of what it is that will work for us, either as a church or as a society. What I'm asking of the Kenyan church is accepting that, is an acceptance that certain of the theological positions that they stood for have no biblical foundation. If we as Christians are going to accept, if we as Christians are going to embrace and live with monogamy as a choice, as the choice of a form of marriage, then let us get there. But let us get there by discussion. Let us get there by accepting the realities of the evils, at least of what we understand polygamy is, or the challenges that polygamy present. But not just a hammer declaration that this is it and it has to be, and because we think the Bible says it is. Thank you.
Well done.